2, 1. Fragments of Silicon for days that feel like more than one day.
Tell you what, every day feels like 10,000 years. Uh, that's not
Mm.
the type of show.
Yeah, that's for the post show.
Anyway, welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon. I'm your host, Adam. Joining me, as always, is the regular crew. Like, and
Hi, I
Mac,
exist.
yeah,
Mhm.
hang on. Yeah, Mac is not here this week. He has drawing work to get caught up on. He
Yeah, he
is
said he
on,
was like 3 or 4 pages behind, I think.
yeah, and one of his web series is starting up again, The Lavenders. Like,
Rest
I'm
in
sure
peace,
he'll
Max.
detail more
Free
about it
time.
next time he's on the show. Also note, our political correspondent's off this week because of the everything. You know, so no post show engagement with him. All right. That aside, let's get to the news. Gallax, why don't you start us off?
Well, this past weekend was the local anime and games and stuff con, so I was doing that, and I'm definitely not as energetic as I used to be because I kept feeling myself getting tired before everything was done for the evening. So that's a thing. And I got back and still felt like I needed to rest. Um, Although I also had a really bad headache the first day back, so that didn't help. But so yeah, I'm getting back into the normal schedule, and also I need to figure out how to get my Cartapass inspection by the end of the month.
Damn.
Or give or take a few days, because they usually don't grab you for not having an up-to-date sticker right away. But so I think I found a place. I failed my inspection on like brake pad width, so I need to get my brakes done. But hopefully that won't be too expensive, and I didn't spend as much time as much money at the con as I sometimes do, so that's should be manageable. Video game wise, I'm looking forward to trying out the games for this week, although I haven't had time yet. And I, uh,
You only have one of them.
well, yeah. Um, and I, in my own time, I've been playing Splatoon 2, and I only have one of the Octo expansion stages left to do, but it's the really hard one where you have to defend the orb from a bunch of aggressive Octolings. So that's hard. But yeah, that's about all I got.
Okay. Ogre.
The recordings are going fine for the most part. I still hate Land's End, but we managed to get through most of that without too much trouble. You'll see in the video. Turns out, apparently, when you're kids, you're stupid and you don't think about shortcuts.
Right.
But let's see.
Like, I had a player's guide.
Was Mario RPG one of the ones that came with a player's guide, or did you buy that
I don't
separately?
think so.
Only Earthbound came with a player's guide. You had to buy a player's guide separate.
Yeah.
And that was still the time I was still using player's guide. I discovered the internet in the late '90s, so even then I had game facts. Help me out with Mega Man Legends. Anyway.
Not really a whole lot personal-wise happened, so.
Well, no news is good news.
I guess that's good. I guess that's good enough for me, so.
All right. Twilight?
Let's see now. Monday, some family from Ohio came to visit, and that was pretty enjoyable. I hadn't seen them in a few years. We usually visit them, but my dad's advanced age is kind of keeping that from happening. But anyway, our new cat is getting more accustomed. It's running around like a child that just got finished eating a lot of candy, he says. And so we're now looking to figure out how to fix our grass problem. I mean, actually fix it now instead of painting over it. And I think we found the solution. We have to wait on that. And thankfully, there's been plenty of rain to see if it'll work out. And I've also been watching SGDQ, and it's been kind of meh, in my opinion, this so far. And gaming-wise, I played some on the game for Sunday, and that's about it.
All right. Petty Fan, you're next.
Well, the biggest thing that happened to me this week is I finally got a new chair for my desk. The old one I've had since like 2010, and like the arm, it was one of the ones that the arms held on the back, and one of the arms broke like 3 or 4 years ago. So to sit in it, I had to have it resting up against one of the supports for my loft bed. And now I don't have to do that anymore. I can just kind of sit anywhere. Really nice. As far as gaming news goes, I rented, what is it? Digimon's Cyber Sleuth Hacker Memory.
That's a name.
Yeah, I forget the full title. It's Japan.
Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth Hacker's Memory.
Yeah.
Cyber Sleuth was the previous game. Hacker's Memory is like a spin-off sequel.
Yeah, it's side story sequel-ish type thing. It's a side story of a side story, if that makes any fucking sense. It's like, so far it's been good, but there's one jackass part in the beginning where the enemies you're surrounded to up towards one certain boss are like, you know, pretty weak in training rookie Digimon, and then the boss they throw ultimate level at you with regen, and the allies it has with it can at best slow you down, at worst lock you out of turns. So that was fun.
I think those games do require a bit of grinding sometimes, although that sounds like it might be a special trick to getting it done or something. I don't know.
Well, it's more I just came in with the wrong type of Digimon type deal. And
attribute matching does give you a significant advantage. Like if the boss is a virus being vaccine, they deal like a 2/3 damage and you deal like double damage.
Yeah. And if you do the right element too, it's ×3.
Right.
And I think aside from that, I'm pretty much good.
Okay. All right. I guess it's my go.
Yep.
Let's see. Well, you might have noticed we didn't have a show yesterday, even though I said we were going to have one on Sunday. Once again, our guest had to cancel out a bit earlier this time, but yeah, that's a thing that's happened, and it's getting sorted out. That's been a big part of this week, as well as setting up stuff for August as we close out the season. Let's see. Also, can the world stop being on fire for 5 minutes? Like, it's really, really hard to concentrate on, doing shit when social media has to have a conniption every 5 minutes. Not unjust, by the way, but it's kind of distracting when I'm being told the apocalypse is nearby every fucking day. Yes, yes, I know my status in the fucking universe, but it's also, this isn't so much the people on social media; it's more the universe. But we'll get to that when we get to that. I have a raging headache because, well, the everything. Aside from that, not much else going on. On the note of the reviews for this week, we've got 2 one-coders, so I've been shouldering the bulk of that. I don't know if any of my contemporaries are going to pick up what we have on the slate, but it is something that changes the dynamics of the reviews. Thankfully, everything worked because,
Yeah, I'd like to be able to help out, but I'm a little bit tight on money since, like I said, con and car work.
I get that. I'm like, we are at the mercy of how many codes are doled out. That's always been the name of the game. Unless the game is very cheap. And that has happened a handful of times where the thing is so, inconsequentially cheap that I can actually shell out to get everyone a copy.
Yeah, I haven't even had money discretional to get stuff on the Steam sale yet.
Right. Like, I picked up a few things in the Steam sale. Nothing too major, mainly because I really don't like spending money on things that are going to sit in my Steam library for ages.
Right.
Because,
well, I usually use Steam sales to clear out stuff that's on my wish list.
Right.
Like stuff that I would get anyway, but I'm trying to get cheaper.
It's also I have more games than you.
That's true. I only have what?
I don't know.
I have 461 games, looks like.
I'm trending towards 1,700.
Yeah.
You can see why I don't feel the desire to get a game like I used to.
Right.
And mind you, that's not just like buying shit. That's, absorbing games for the show. And that's usually what takes priority. So it goes. Anyway, that'll do it for the news. So merrily we shall roll along to the interview portion of tonight's broadcast. And joining us once again is John from MangaGamer.
Hello, it's good to be back here with you guys.
Indeed. It's not been too long since the last time you were here, but the entire scene shifted in that space.
There was quite a big, there was that big incident.
Well, it's I'm like, still, like, the foreshadowing happened, right around the last time we had you on, because, I suppose my first question is actually towards A Kiss for the Petals, Maidens of Michael. Is that still banned on Steam?
Oh yeah, that's still banned on Steam. We still haven't heard anything from Valve on that game. We sent them emails. We still send them emails regularly asking for clarification or the chance to appeal the banning of that game, and they don't respond. They just don't bother to respond. It's like
what?
Steam just doesn't
Valve
care
doing
to talk
something
to
that
anyone.
What? Valve not doing something that would require effort?
They spend effort to automate things.
Yeah, they're like a lot of big tech companies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always been Valve's ethos. They do not want to dig down and actually hire a human staff for the examining of games.
Yeah.
But you know, I I'm not sure if Maidens and Michael the situation will ever resolve itself.
Well, it should be, considering what they've said.
Right.
Yeah, well, exactly. And the fact that they haven't responded to us or done anything about it just kind of proves the duplicity of that statement.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's be honest. Valve. I know what they said, but
What they said sounds good, but what it actually means in terms of like the meat and meaning behind it is that nothing has changed.
right. And we'll get into that, but I suppose we would have to catch up people who haven't heard the news. They might not be
Yeah.
novels or whatever, but okay, not too long ago, Valve announced a new policy. They announced they announced a tightening of policy, if you will. They announced that visual novels with sexual content in them would be further regulated.
So let me actually go ahead and clarify a little bit with that. So there was no policy announcement. There was nothing saying that Valve had changed a policy or that there was anything new that Valve was doing. It's just one day.
Yeah, it's more they just
all
all of a
woke
sudden
up
started
to
banning all
emails
visual novels.
saying that games we had been selling for years had suddenly, without warning or reason or anything, been deemed pornography and needed to be removed. There was, like, that's what I was saying. Like, there was nothing from Valve to indicate that policy was shifting, that they were going to be implementing new standards. No, there was none of that because they don't have very many standards to begin with. And so, like, that was also all just, that's a huge part of the whole problem with this issue, is that Valve can and did do this without any warning whatsoever.
Well, and here's the rub, people. Valve isn't in the wrong technically when they can do that. It's here's the letter of the law we're talking about here. It's Valve service, so they can dictate whatever can and cannot go on there. But
right. They don't legally need a reason to remove any game they see fit.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's not bad practice to, just randomly do shit.
Right.
But
especially when your business is one like Steam that has managed to establish itself as the #1 seller in the PC market, almost a monopoly. It effectively is a monopoly, but there's at least some people that are trying to shake that foundation.
I'm aware. It's frustrating, but yeah, it's better than, say, on the situation on consoles where, it's like Sony, for example, just flat out does not allow adult content on their platform, and
But at least they're upfront about that, and like I said, at least with Sony, you have that standard. Sony has their review board that you put your games through, so that before it ever launches, they will tell you if you can put it on there or not, or they'll at least give you the chance to make whatever changes you need in order to ensure that it is satisfying their standards and can be sold on there. With Valve, there's none of that. There's none of that review process. There are none of those outlined standards. It's literally just Valve can, any single employee at Valve can wake up one morning, decide they don't like a game, and take it off the platform.
Right. On the subject of standards, I suppose we should talk about the double standards. Because, let's be honest, the pornography target was only towards...
it's only towards, like, anime pornography.
Yeah.
And it's also towards the small set. You think they were really going to do that over a Ubisoft or an Activision or what have you?
I think they would have if they got away with it for visual novels. If they had started to get away with it, I think they might have tried and push it. But that's entirely speculation. and probably not a road to go too far down.
But yeah,
On-
meanwhile, House Party is still available.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like
suppose-
games like those didn't get any kind of notice,
Yeah.
or genital jousting for that matter.
Right.
You know, it's okay to have dicks flying into each other on Steam, but put them on anime characters, and now it's suddenly illegal according to Valve.
I'll note that one did well, maybe not Steam, but I remember Watch Dogs 2. Like, but that's a thing for another day. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's like this ended up being one big mess, and games that we've covered on the program were being targeted. Like, I distinctly remember Mutiny being in the list of.
Oh
this
yeah,
is- this has got to
Mutiny,
go.
Honey Pop. There was a couple of stuff from the developers of Necopara that got targeted. Kindred Spirits, of all games that we had on Steam, like of all the games we have on Steam, Kindred Spirits was the one they targeted. Like, not to throw myself under the bus, but our company has plenty of titles that are more risk than Kindred Spirits that would have been easier targets for that kind of crackdown.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that Kindred Spirits kind of showcases what this was actually about, which isn't a surprise. It's not just about the, suppression of the anime tits. It's also targeting LGBT material. Like, especially if the rumors of who was behind this are true. Like, there was some right-wing group that was taking credit for this.
Yeah, there was a right-wing group that was all about, like, preventing the sexual exploitation of children and exposing kids to sexual content because kids are the only ones who play video games. Right. No.
Yeah. I don't know how true that is. I don't think anyone outside of Valve knows because...
Yeah, I have no idea if they're... Because that's what their group was claiming, is that they got a bunch of their members to get together and basically spam reports on specific titles, which in that case, it actually makes more sense that Kindred Spirits was targeted over our other titles because Kindred Spirits is one of our releases that got the most press attention.
Right.
But like I said, we can't verify that. We have no idea if that's the case or not. Valve certainly isn't telling any of us what caused their decision. So we know about as much as anyone else who's read this group's claims.
Yeah. But once again, can't confirm it. But if the truth ever leaks out, so to speak, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
No, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some kind of mass reporting that led to this, because I can see Valve responding to a mass report, and because I don't think it. This is me guessing, so obviously I don't really have any proof or evidence or things to back this up. But I would not be surprised if the employee who sent out all these notices was someone just sort of near the bottom in charge of reviewing reports, because like we compared our email with like the email that LupeSoft got since we published Mutiny for them, and it was basically the exact same email with just title and company name changed.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I myself am not unfamiliar to template emails. Like,
Yeah.
it saves time. Like, so.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So the big thing that came out of this, well, there are actually a few things. First of all, there's Valve's announcement on policy. They've taken an interesting track. They've decided.
Yeah, it squares with their usual minimum effort stance, though, pretty neatly.
Yeah, it doesn't really change anything.
No.
I mean, theoretically, what they said is that they'll be allowing anything on the store that isn't illegal or trolling, which is kind of vague.
Yeah, it's
I
like,
mean, that's basically just a simplification of their standards. Well, and I say standards in quotation marks there already.
Yeah,
'Cause, like, if
theoretically,
you-
this might cut down on visual novels and other borderline adult stuff or other adult stuff getting taken out, but also they could still do it if they want to.
Right. So a lot of people are looking at the statement from Valve and being like, "Oh yeah, Valve has decided to just allow all the porn on Steam," and it's like, no, that's really not the case, because like, if you want to start digging into details, you know, I don't think it's a secret that Valve is based in Washington State, and in Washington State, selling pornography is illegal. It's in their code of laws. They have written out what, the fines and penalties for if you're caught selling what they define as pornography, which falls pretty much under the standard U.S. definition for obscene content, which is any lascivious material that doesn't have artistic science or other merit that justifies it, which means it's completely and entirely subjective.
And this is why they can't distribute the AO versions of games on Steam.
Right. And that's why you never I don't think anyone ever will, because like I said, even though their policy sounds great, they won't allow anything that's illegal, but they're not defining what they consider illegal. They're not outlining any clarifications on standards. And like I said, it's like, okay, so like, even if we try and dissect that statement and be like, okay, so clearly you didn't say this, but clearly pornography is still illegal because of state laws for where you're incorporated. But so then break that down even further and like, okay, what do you consider pornography? There's nothing, absolutely nothing on that.
yada yada. Anyway, so the upshot of this whole debacle is good old games. So let me give you a bit of background on them. They saw a business opportunity and they have allowed visual novels onto their store, which is a, quite frankly, stunning reversal of their previous stances. Because I know in the past they have not considered visual novels to be games, but as the saying goes, money talks, bullshit walks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Once again, how did the whole GOG, alignment happen?
So, honestly, in many ways, the timing was just kind of all too fortuitous and ironic.
Right.
We had been talking to GOG prior to everything with Steam. Like, we had been speaking with them, I want to say a month, maybe a little longer before, working out the details. Because GOG had approached us, and it looked like Sekai Project as well got some of their games up at the same time as us. So GOG had approached us saying that they wanted to start adding visual novels to their platform, and that they wanted to, but still like following in line with their, company's ethos of bringing the best games, the greatest games, under their platform. So we spoke with them, and like we worked out sort of a list of games that we thought would be good for the platform, that we felt would be appropriate, that would get a good response. And then they started their review process. And GOG actually, that's why there are currently only so many of our games available on GOG right now, specifically the Higurashi series, and I believe a couple other titles. And that is because they actually took the time to play the games, review the games, and give it a solid decision of whether or not that title would be good for the platform. And they're still doing that review for some of the other titles that are sort of on our list of games we want to move and transition to selling on GOG as well.
Indeed.
So that's
I'll
sort of
admit-
still an ongoing process.
I'll admit I'm not the biggest fan of that because, well, I've known the developers who had their stuff rejected for no discernible reason, but there's no perfect solution.
Right.
So, you kind of have to roll with it. Now, I suppose another question is, did your licensors have any concerns over GOG? Because one of their mission statements is DRM-free gaming.
So not really, because our website itself has for the past few years now, we've already been transitioning to DRM free on our website. I think at this point, I believe at this point, we actually don't have any games on our site that still have DRM. So the DRM issue is one that we sort of already worked out with our licensors, because it was something we were pushing for ourselves on our own end, because we do have a lot of customers and fans that come to us and want to be able to enjoy the games DRM free, and quite frankly, the DRM that's out there that we can really look at just isn't any effective against piracy anyways. So it's not really a smart investment.
Makes sense. Now, once again, given GOG's location, what's their stance on adult games? Like, will you be able to sell the uncensored versions there, or is it like the Steam thing?
So we're not going to be able to sell our fully uncensored adult titles on there. At least not something like our upcoming Evinical or something like Please Bang My Wife. That's not going to be going to GOG.
That's not surprising.
Yeah, but I don't know if you guys saw, but right after they launched the visual novels, GOG followed up that announcement with their own response to someone that was asking GOG that question, and they answered it on Twitter, saying it's like, well, they're not going to allow the uncensored content on their site. They don't really care if there are adult patches available elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably what we're going to see going forward with GOG, is the adult patching method.
Now, do they have a problem with you like advertising the adult patches are available on your site, or is it still like Steam in that regard? Where if somebody else mentions it, but you can't really mention it.
I think that's a detail I'd have to get our staff to clarify with, like, if we like, because I understand like the question is, can we mention it on the store page on GOG?
Mhm.
And I don't know if we can, and I'm not even sure if that's really appropriate to do, but it does seem like GOG doesn't care that we put that out on our social media, or
Yeah.
include that like in our own personal press announcements.
Right. So, and to further break it down, this has motivated the visual novel community not just to get stuff on GOG, but on other platforms like itch.io and Game Jolt. Are you looking in that direction as well?
Game Jolt's not one I've heard of. We have worked with Itch.io in the past for a couple of games, and they have reached out to us following the recent issues with Steam. We haven't done anything on that front yet because we're still waiting for some clarification from them. Because one of the big questions I had for Itch.io was basically the same question and issue we're dealing with Steam and Valve, is what are your standards? And Itch.io was at least nice enough to say, you know what, okay, we don't really have any, we're gonna talk about this and come back to you later when we get something ironed out.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And shifting back to Valve, yeah, what are your Steam plans going forward? Are you still going to release, you know, the potentially sexually provocative games still, or are you going to keep those off of Steam now, given recent events?
I think that is honestly that is something that we're really just gonna have to sort of test. Like it's gonna be sort of trial and error. Obviously, there's some games that we put out and produce where we don't really have to worry about that. Our recent Steam release, the House in Fata Morgana, A Requiem for Innocence, is a good example of that, where that game is unquestionably okay for Steam. Or at the very least, if Steam decides that game is questionable, we've got a whole other set of issues.
Mhm.
It doesn't even look that anime.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's like games like that, games like Higurashi, they're kind of a no-brainer. They're going to come to Steam. There's some games that we're still going to put out on Steam, but we might say make stronger edits than we were originally planning to for the Steam version. And at the same time, we do want to try and like sit down with Steam and get some kind of title that has riskier content and have them like review it and see if that's acceptable, because like we know that we are sort of one of the leaders in the industry, and someone needs to figure out where Steam's line in the sand is in all this.
Yeah.
And I know there's plenty of developers out there aside from us that are probably looking at Steam right now and going, okay, can I still do this? Can I still do that? Is this game idea I had still going to work? Or am I going to have to scrap it and work on this other idea that I've put on the back burner because I don't know how Steam's going to react? And so it affects the business for a lot of developers in this industry, and that's not good. That this kind of sudden shift and strain and stress is being put on all these developers that are essentially, I mean, cottage industries. Like I know a lot of like fans in gaming are usually familiar with like the AAA games and the giant studios that make great games, but it's like, yeah, for visual novels, a lot of the staff and development teams for visual novels are basically people just working out of their basements via Skype and Discord in order to try and get this game out so that they can pay rent.
I'm like, I suppose the question is, when do you envision such a meeting to be happening? Like, how do you get
That was going to be my response right there, buddy.
Yeah, I'm like, that's kind of my question. How do you get a hold of them?
When does the world end? Add 2 weeks after that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I laugh because it's a good question. It's an obvious question, but it's one that there's really no answer to, because it's like sometimes we'll email them and get a response right away. Sometimes we'll email them and never hear from them on that topic for months and months and months. Or sometimes, it's just, yeah, it's kind of a luck of the draw whether or not you can get through to them.
That's about what I was expecting. Like I suppose outside of physically going there and knocking on the door,
Which is an option. And that's actually how we got the clarification that we originally got from them and posted about, I think, back in, oh, was it around February, March of this year or last year, when they clarified that adult patches were okay to us. We got that because we went to their office and sat down with them in their headquarters. And of course, yeah, this whole situation is also throwing that whole statement and agreements and clarifications into question. So it's
Yeah.
not a pretty situation right now for games that deal in adult content.
No. It's like, they put out. It's like they put out that statement, to mitigate the public outrage.
Yes,
Like,
and I think that's kind of exactly what it was.
but and unfortunately, I think it worked because
It definitely, so many people have calmed down since that came out, even though it doesn't really note any real changes in policy.
right, and like people were getting up in arms more about the lack of curation, the usual Steam problems like the lack of curation, trash games appearing, broken, whatever. What does trolling mean? But the main visual novels being pulled seems to have abated.
Right.
And Valve's probably going to stay their hand because it's not been that long. It's since this happened. Like, if you're going to reverse course, you don't do it in the immediate aftermath. You wait until the heat's died down. So,
Yeah.
So the basic situation is we may be revisiting this next time we have you on. Like,
Yeah, because who knows when we'll see developments on that end from Valve.
right. So, as expected, we are running low on time. So, I suppose we should ask a bit about the actual business. Like, what do you have upcoming, convention appearances at all?
Yeah. So obviously, our most recent release this month was Higurashi When They Cry, Chapter 6, Sumi Horoboshi. This is one of the first chapters where you actually get to see the story from Rena's perspective, and it starts answering a lot of questions and delving deeper into some of the mysteries in the Higurashi and why the story itself is sort of told the way it is. We also have our newest adult title, Avinical, which is an adult RPG by Alisoft, featuring artwork by the artist of Senran Kagura. That actually comes out tonight at midnight Eastern Time. So if you're old enough and enjoy a good RPG with good hot sex, that's going to be available tonight for everyone. And we do have Anime Expo coming up next weekend, the July 4th, 5th, 6th weekend, where we do have a lot of new announcements coming up. We'll have one of Alice Soft's artists there with us as a guest doing autographs. Later in July, we also have Happy Meyer from Purple Software. That's coming out July 12th. It's a good character story about this guy who's sort of, his issue causes him to have difficulties discerning between reality and dreams because he's constantly having these lucid dreams. So both reality and dreams seem equally real to him, and he remembers them both equally well. And so there's a lot of play in that between the dream world and the real world and the confusion therein, as he and the heroines are each sort of trying to resolve their own more deep-seated issues that get brought up along the course of the story. later this later at the towards the end of July, we will actually be adding a bunch of English developed games to our catalog. We did receive a lot of response from English developers who were reasonably upset at what happened with Steam, and they've approached us, and so we will be adding them to our catalog and giving them an alternative place to sell their games with less scrutiny, where they can actually feature the full content they intended for their games without having to deal with patches or things like that. So we're excited to be bringing that, and we do hope that more developers will take that example and come to us with their games and bring their titles to our website too. Because we want our fellows in this industry to be able to publish and sell the games that they make as they intended. Because that's very important to telling for the artists and the creators involved to be able to tell the stories that are driving them to create.
Right. Like, that's good to hear. That's very good to hear. Because I'd say the trust is gone. You know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Even if some of the fans still have a lot of trust in Valve, I think they have, if not completely destroyed, significantly harmed the trust between them and developers in this industry.
Yeah, I'd say that that's very true. It's just this is the dangers of a monopoly or a monopoly like situation. I know
Yeah.
the PC marketplace is not a monopoly, never will be, because you've got your own store. There are competitors out there, but nobody has the reach, the power,
Right.
the everything that Valve does.
Yeah. It's not legally a monopoly. Like, by legal definitions, it's not a monopoly, but it's effectively a monopoly.
Right.
And that's kind of the issue.
Yeah. And
But hopefully this pressure with games going to GOG and other stores, hopefully that sort of soft pressure will actually encourage Valve to do something of meaning regarding this issue.
we can only hope and pray at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right. So on that note, I think we will conclude things for this time period.
Okay.
And I'll extend you the traditional invite September 12th. Is that good for you?
Yeah.
All right. So I'll mark you down there. You'll start off our 10th season.
Okay. Well, thank you all for having me as usual. And like I just listed a short while ago, we do have a lot of good games still coming out on our website tonight, in the future. So if you're listening and you're interested in what we do and what the products that we bring to the market, please visit our website, MangaGamer.com. Take a look. We have such a wide variety of titles that I'm sure there's something there for everyone. And thank you for having me on the podcast.
No problem. No problem. Any fan players to the next segment? All right. Welcome to the topic of discussion. This week we are talking about Banjo-Kazooie, the Banjo-Kazooie franchise, because time for a memento mori. The game is turning 20 years old this week. There are a lot of games that are, all-time iconic games that are turning 20 this year. In fact, like, we did a show on the year of gaming in 1998, not too long ago. You're going to be hearing, like, Resident Evil 2 is turning 20, Metal Gear Solid, Ocarina of Time, F-Zero X, and so on and so forth. And we might cover some of those, we might not. Like, it all depends. And keep in mind, there are a lot of games turning 20 this year. So, in the case of Banjo-Kazooie, it just lined up well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, now, if you're not familiar with Banjo-Kazooie, I'm like, you're clearly of a young age, because Banjo-Kazooie has not had a game in about a decade. In fact, exactly a decade. 2008 was when Nuts and Bolts came out. And Banjo-Kazooie really hasn't been a star since the N64 days.
Mm-hmm.
I will say he is a mascot that has retained his popularity, or at least seems to have retained. Now, we'll get into the question of whether or not there should be another Banjo-Kazooie game a bit later, but going back to Nuts and Bolts, 2008 was probably the worst time to release a Banjo-Kazooie game, just because the world was burnt out on 3D platformers for the most part.
And you could kind of tell based on how they treat the genre in the game.
Mm-hmm. They were told, Rare was told that Nuts and Bolts wasn't going to sell because it was a mascot platformer, and that those things were dead. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that making it into a weird Lego racer that still has some platforming elements wasn't a weird choice, but they didn't have to say literally in the opening of the game, but who'd want to jump around on platforms and collect shit? Some kind of loser?
Yeah. Banjo-Kazooie wasn't exactly Nuts and Bolts wasn't exactly respectful of its source material, but we'll get to Nuts and Bolts more in a bit. But as far as the original two platformers on the N64, they are considered to be all-time classics. Still beloved to this day. I'm which is pretty amazing for a 90s mascot platformer. Not a whole lot of those still resonate 20 years later. It's a statement to just how on point Rare was in the N64 days. Now, as far as the actual legacy, is Banjo-Tooie two of the greatest platformers ever made? Opinions are a bit more divided than you might think.
As just platformers, probably not, but they're also kind of that specific genre of platformer where the platforming is less the challenge than the getting all the stuffs.
Right. That is one of the things that is brought up in the discussion too. It's people say it's not really a platform game. I wouldn't go that far. There is a lot of jumping, but it's not like Mario. It's not the focus. The focus is it's the Rare design philosophy of that age. It's collect stuff. So I'm not I'm not sure where I would fall on the debate, but I think it's a platformer. So I think the discussion there is a bit immaterial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as the actual design, I honestly do think Banjo-Kazooie was better than Mario 64.
I agree.
Mario, it's not hard.
No, I know that.
Mario 64 was very good, but it was also very the first of its...
Right. Mario 64 was a good foundation, but it was still a foundation. And
Banjo-Kazooie is elaborating on that formula in a specific direction.
Right, in a lot of specific direction. It's probably the best balance of everything that Rare has delivered in that age, in that specific idiom of developments. That's not bringing, say, GoldenEye or Perfect Dark into the equation, because those are just very different games all over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's but it doesn't have the excess poured into it like Banjo-Tooie. I'll be honest, I didn't get very far in Banjo-Tooie because I didn't have the patience for it back then. Like,
Especially as one of the questionable mechanics in Banjo-Kazooie is the whole you have to get all of the, is it the feathers or whatever? There's one of the collectibles you have to get all of in one run.
The Jinjos. Like, yeah, I'm like, I would, and by the age of Banjo-Tooie, Rare's development philosophies has just gotten ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
It's like everyone brings up Donkey Kong 64 as the apexes, and they are right, like literally right. Donkey Kong 64 actually had the Guinness World Record for most collectibles for a measure of time. Like, and I will say Tooie is a better game than Donkey Kong 64, if only because it had less character switching. It's it still had the character switching, like that's another thing that was absent in the first Kazooie game. But it's still like I may like if I had the chance to replay Tooie, maybe I'd reevaluate things, especially since we have things like GTA 5 available, which are just a quantum expansion over what Rare was doing in the 90s. But anyway, I liked Banjo-Kazooie well enough. How many of you here have played the first two games?
I have, and I loved the first one.
I never owned them, but I played them some.
I have not, so yeah, that's
I never got to own many N64 games.
Duly noted. Right, and yeah, if you are to pick them up these days, and you can either get Rare Replay, or if you have it at a 360, just get the Xbox Live Arcade version. Yeah. Because they really are the definitive versions.
I think the 360 version is honestly the better one over the Rare Replay because I think they fixed more of the bugs.
Well, here's the thing: it's the same game. Like the Banjo-Kazooie games are not emulated; they are the Xbox Live Arcade versions. Like, just they have the backwards compatibility.
Oh, that's Conquer I'm thinking of. They put the original version of Conquer in Rare Replay instead of Live and Reloaded.
Right. Like, yeah, it's like, you'll be fine with the Banjo games and Perfect Dark. It's more like Blast Core or Jet Force Gemini that might have issues because those are emulated. Hell, Nuts and Bolts is actually emulated. I think that was before the backwards compatibility could be implemented for that game. So I'd have to check on the status if that might have been switched out or whatever. But yeah, it's like the Banjo-Kazooie Xbox Live Arcade games, I believe run at 1080p, 60 frames per second. I mean, these are N64 games. It could be 720p. Like, keep in mind when these games were released, those kind of specifications were only just becoming really important.
Yeah, at that point, a 720p was like one of the flagship TVs. Like you were spending a few hundred for one.
Yeah, it's like 720 was where you were aiming for. 1080p could be achievable, but you didn't see it that often. Like,
right.
But once again, it's an N64 game touched up because, yeah, I don't know if you've looked at an N64 game recently, but ooh,
oh boy.
yeah, I'm like,
Yeah, early 3D graphics and even like middle 3D graphics did not age well.
No, they did
No.
not.
Yeah, it's like, and N64 graphics may be among the worst. Just fucking Vaseline. Like, like they the anti-aliasing on the N64 was always dialed up to 11. So yeah, you didn't get the Jagfest that stabbed your eyes on the PlayStation, but you just got Blurrovision. I am really glad we are not in that age anymore.
Same.
No, and the Banjo-Kazooie Xbox Live Arcade renditions fix some of the biggest problems of those games. That is
such as the aforementioned must collect everything all at once issue.
Right. The notes are remembered. The Jinjos are remembered. Everything is remembered, which I think caused some unintentional bugs. Also, I think they fixed this, but I remember at launch the music was actually miscued because, speaking of frame rates, N64 frame rates were fucking awful.
Yeah.
Like frame rates weren't really much of a consideration back then, outside of like say F-Zero, where they were dead set on having that being 60 frames per second. And they got it. The game looks like fucking ass, even for an N64 game, but they got it. That's the kind of thing as opposed to say Extreme G2, which looked a lot prettier, but ran at probably 10 frames per second, 15.
If you were lucky.
Yeah. Like, hitting 30 was an accomplishment. Like, being in your mid-20s was pretty much the standard of the N64 era. Like, so there's a lot that has been improved with these versions. Probably the crowning glory is the full realization of the stop and swap. And if you are even remotely familiar with Banjo-Kazooie, you already know what this is.
Like, a really good idea stymied in the planning stages by hardware production updates.
Or rather, fuck's sakes, why didn't you just use the controller pack?
Indeed.
Well, I mean, sure, but that would have stopped all the fun of, physically wrenching your cartridge out of the system while it's still on.
Well, and I think part of it was they already had the cartridges printed. They would have had to have recalled them, add the code to use the cartridge pack, and then reprinted them.
I mean, initially.
Yeah, maybe. The world may never know unless we can ever hunt down, people who worked on it.
Mm-hmm. And, yeah, so the stop and swap fully exists. It's compatible with both Banjo-Tooie, like you can unlock moves now like they originally intended, and it's actually compatible with Nuts and Bolts. It's less impressive there, as all you do is unlock some novelty gear.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something, I suppose. And it finally got that monkey off their back, because every interview Rare ever did about Banjo-Kazooie, it always came up.
Without fail.
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember one interview where they brought up the stop and swap thing, and the interviewer was like, "What's that?" That's how bad it got. Like, that's how bad it got. Anyway, but yeah, that was the watershed era of Banjo-Kazooie. Then we get into the era that nobody fucking remembers, the Game Boy Advance. Like, yes, there were other Banjo-Kazooie games other than the big three console games, because Rare, even though they got bought out by
Microsoft,
they still worked with Nintendo.
Yeah, Microsoft only really cared about them not making games on the GameCube or yeah, it was GameCube at that point.
Yeah, on the
Uh,
game. They
So they still made Game Boy Advance games, and honestly, they made more and better games on the Game Boy Advance than they did for the Xbox. So,
right.
or more better. I shouldn't say more and better. I don't know what the actual numbers are.
Mm-hmm. And so the upshot is, even though their Game Boy Advance games were in limbo, while the whole transition was happening, they eventually did release all of the things that were in development. In fact, they released more Game Boy Advance games than they released for the Xbox. It's just so when it came to actually publishing the games, they went with THQ, and THQ wasn't exactly an ideal partner. Like, because I don't know, nobody maybe the game sold decently, but nobody remembers Grunty's Revenge. Nobody remembers Banjo Pilot. Though there might be factors beyond just the lack of advertising, or the fact that THQ isn't Nintendo in terms of broadcasting. Even back in like the PlayStation 2, they could do well with SpongeBob. I guess they did well with Sonic, but Banjo, not so much. But anyway, Grunty's Revenge. This is what they call an interquel. That is a thing that happened between two things. Think like the Lion King 2 1/2 or whatever, or 1 1/2, whatever that thing was.
Yeah, they're usually, I think it's 1.5, but I'm not sure. Anyway, it's only an interquel if it was released after the two things it goes between, usually. But
which it did. Like this is, this is after the first game, but it is before 2. In fact, it deals with Gruntilda sort of getting out from under the rock, as in her soul escapes the prison and gets put into this robot, and you got to put her back in her stone prison, basically. And the Game Boy Advance game is, it's a Banjo-Kazooie game, only it's top-down, and
not the best perspective for a Banjo-Kazooie game.
Yeah, I think I talked about this on Sunday, but you want to talk, the polygon ceiling actually does work both ways. I won't say Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge was awful, but it was goddamn forgettable. Like,
well, just the character and mechanical design in Banjo-Kazooie is very designed around three-dimensional movement.
Yeah, it's a very vanilla game. It's like I played it, but I'm struggling to remember a damn thing about it. Like there's a reason why this doesn't come up. Rare hasn't re-released it. Microsoft hasn't re-released it. And as far as Banjo Pilot, that's more of a case of they had to do some shunting. The biggest consequence of the Microsoft buyout was, unless they were working with Nintendo again, Rare actually did do the Game Boy Advance versions of the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, and Diddy Kong Racing for the DS. Weird, I know, but it happened. But for their own games, they could no longer use Donkey Kong characters. And the Banjo Pilot game was originally going to be a Diddy Kong Racing game.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. So that got shifted to Banjo because, well, that is the franchise character that they own. And once again, I never played this. It didn't look interesting to me, and I've not seen good reviews about it. Honestly, the history of it seems to be more interesting than the game itself. It's a 3D racing type thing on the Game Boy Advance. Those things usually didn't work out too well. then we come to nuts and bolts, which we've already talked about a bit. But yeah, nuts and bolts came out at probably the worst time, or certainly one of the worst times. 2008, um, yeah, wasn't good for mascots. Wasn't good for mascot platformers. Like, and keep in mind, Banjo was an established name, a very established name, but Rare wasn't exactly batting 1,000 with their games on the, under Microsoft's watch. Like, um, really, Rare didn't have a sales hit until the Kinect era. Like, that's how much of a styles clash they were. Like, not so much these days. Like, Sea of Thieves actually has done well. Like,
Surprising for a game with no content, but
yeah, that's a thing for another day. Well, also keep in mind this is taking into account Game Pass. Like, it
right.
seems to be a really good Game Pass game.
Obviously, yeah.
But shit like Viva Pinata, Grabbed by the Ghoulies, Cameo, what have you, really didn't set the world on fire sales-wise.
I think of the ones you've mentioned, I think Viva Pinata did the best.
It's possible. I'm like, Grabbed by the Ghoulies, I know, is the worst-selling game in Rare's history. Like, hell, I'm like having everything I've seen in the game. I think that game would have struggled on the GameCube. Like, Nintendo helped Rare make stars out of a lot of their games, not all of them. Like Blast Corps, nah, that's pretty obscure. Jet Force Gemini didn't really do the business. Conker's Bad Fur Day, cult classic, but there was a whole range of issues operating against that.
Yeah.
I did like Jet Force Gemini, and I really wanted to play Blast Corps, but never got to.
Surprisingly, one of their bigger flops of the age was Mickey's Speedway USA. Or at least, though that might just be because nobody talks about it. I'm just not sure how well that sold. But, for, like, when we're talking about kart races of the age, it's a kart racer done by Rare, and, yeah, it doesn't come up in conversation. Just odd. Anyway, as far as nuts and bolts go, yeah, this was, we've talked to Grant Kirkhope about a lot of Rare stuff. He told us this was originally supposed to be a remake, a straight up remake of the first Banjo-Kazooie game, only with co-op. And yeah, that didn't work out for obvious reasons. But as far as the Banjo 3E stuff that they teased at one conference, yeah, Microsoft just wasn't keen on having another mascot platformer. Because, once again, mascot platformers were dying, and Microsoft just never did have any good business with that. They tried.
I mean, it's not what their audience mostly wanted anyway.
Yeah, I'm like, Voodoo Vince, Blinks, what have you. There's actually a few more that they dropped, like Psychonauts. They were going to publish that at one point, but they declined after shifting market forces. And a game called Torque, if I'm recalling correctly, it still came out, but another third-party grab. Point is, Microsoft tried that game, got burnt, wasn't really interested, and we'll never know how well that will work out, because they weren't exactly wrong. Like, mascot platformers were certainly glutted for the 2 generations, and yeah, kind of lost steam there. Unless you were Mario or Sonic or, and this will never stop surprising me, Ratchet and Clank. I mean, even Crash and Spyro. They still had games in 2008, but after that, they went into long slumbers. I'm like, Skylanders does not fucking count, by the way. I know Spyro was the jumping. It started out as a Spyro remake, but it became about the Skylanders, not Spyro. He was part of that instead of the other way around. Anyway, you know, it's not surprising that Nuts and Bolts tanked, because whatever the merits of the platformer conversation, nobody wanted this. Nobody wanted this weird racing platformy thing. Like, and nobody bought it. So Banjo-Kazooie has remained in stasis for a decade. But, you know,
aside from a definite attempted imitator, which
yeah.
was not super popular, even though it seems to have done okay at what it set out to do mostly.
But I suppose the question is, should Banjo-Kazooie be revived? Because it's not just you got ukulele over there, but you do have. We are in the age of, maybe a mini age, but still an age of the mascot platformer revival. It's been that long, you know, where the nostalgia force is hitting in, because, as I said, you know, a lot of these games are hitting 20 years old. That's about the time where the negative attitudes subside and the rosy, warm feelings really hit home.
Mm-hmm.
It's no.
And I mean, a lot of the stuff in mascot platformers got shifted over into open world games, and some of the mascot platformers lately are pretty open worldish.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, granted that's not so much of an issue with Banjo-Kazooie because, and Banjo-Tooie, because those were about as open world as you were getting in that age.
Yeah. Right. I was more getting at that, like, if they brought back Banjo-Kazooie with setups kind of similar to, say, Mario Odyssey, it might work.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, you look like Crash Bandicoot came back, Spyro the Dragon's coming back, Mario went back to the design philosophies of Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, Sonic Forces exists.
Yeah.
You know, we did, you know, we are getting homages to that era, not just ukulele, but A Hat in Time as well. There are some others in development, but 3D platformers take time. Like, the point is, if there's a viable point to bring back Banjo Kazooie, it's now.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
maybe give them modern character designs that aren't as terrifying as the one in Nuts and Bolts.
Right. Well, if you're going to go the full nostalgia route, you have them look like they did in the 90s, only not blurry and low
like the rendered art, not like the actual in-game art.
Also, not like the bastardizations they did in Nuts and Bolts.
Well, that's what I was saying.
All right, so I think that'll about do it for this episode. This was a long one since there was a lot to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so the week ahead. Let's see. Nothing on Friday this week. On Sunday, we have 3 reviews upcoming. We have Floor Kids, which you may have seen in a Nintendo Direct. It was a fairly hyped indie game. I'm like, but if you don't know what it is, it's ostensibly a rhythm game with a sketch with kids in a sketchy art style. You know, we'll have some trailer footage of that. This is one of the one code ones, but I say, like, it looks like a rhythm game, but it actually plays more like Tony Hawk. I'll quantify that more on Sunday. We also have Mars or Die. This is a real-time strategy game, kind of in the style of Pikmin, just without the Pikmin. It's like you are controlling an avatar and you place units using the controller. the game works much better with a controller.
Indeed.
I'll be honest, it's not the most compelling thing I've ever played, but more on that on Sunday. And I'm, you know, I'm really pleased to say that we will be reviewing Luminous Remastered. If you don't know what Luminous is, once again, that's a pretty impressive rock you've been under, because, yeah, Luminous is probably one of the last great Tetris imitators released. Like, there are still games in the mold of Tetris released, but I think this is really the last one that had that kind of notoriety. Because if you've seen footage of Luminous, you will see the Tetris influence right away. It's like just with the square blocks. Luminous does not play all like Tetris. Like, more on that on Sunday. And the coming up next week in terms of interviews, let's see. We do have a Tuesday show, as we have Stav of Chronic Spartan. I believe he was the one behind the game Flow that we reviewed last year. Has an upcoming game. Hang on. I'm gonna have to look this up because I've forgotten what it is. It's been a busy week. Live research and all that stuff. Let's see. Yeah, there's a YouTube trailer of this. Yeah, it was Glow. Gym Empire. That is the game we will be talking about then, on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, well, we're going to. First of all, we're going to be on an earlier time than usual because it's the 4th of July. We will be broadcasting at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. That's a lot to do with our guest because, well, there are fireworks celebrations going on, and he has to go to one. Right? But it is my grand pleasure we will be having James Montagna of Way Forward Technologies onto the program. If I have to fucking tell you what Way Forward Technologies is, like, we're gonna be here a while. Just like, fucking Shantae, Mighty Switchforce.
Good thing I have Shantae Half Genie Hero.
Yeah. I'm like, and he's an artist at Way Forward. I'm like, special thanks to Keith for setting this up. Networking, it pays off sometimes. So, I'm not sure if Mac's going to be able to join us for that program, especially since it's earlier. But, so it goes. Anyway, until Sunday, I wish you good gaming.